We are finally here. It is time for the division previews on the Athletic Football Show. And Derrik, there was really no other place we could start other than the division that houses the defending Super Bowl champions. So we are doing the NFC East today.
I mean, that's one of those things like the NFL gets that right every year, right? We open the season with, the game
right.
coming off of whoever won the Super Bowl. And so I feel like it's only right that we do the same thing here.
I didn't mean to make you do the Cowboys on like our first big show of the year, Dave. I think it just kind of happened to land that way. That wasn't even in front of mind for me whatsoever.
I think that's best though. Just get it out of the way. Like I don't want to linger on it. I don't want to have to think about it. We can just rip the Band-Aid off, talk through it, and we can carry on with more uplifting teams later.
We've done this over the last couple of years. There's going to be a bunch of categories for all of these teams. Some of them are carryovers from last year. Some of them are new, but we're going to have a lot of fun with all the new ones that we are including here. So let's start. Here it is, our preview for the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles. If you guys are watching on YouTube, we would love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel. Please let us know your thoughts, where we're wrong about this stuff, where we might be right, who you agree with, who you disagree with, all of that fun stuff. Let's dig into it. The Eagles offseason in 60 seconds. Extended Nick Sirianni, promoted Kevin Patullo to their offensive coordinator after losing Kellen Moore to the New Orleans Saints as their head coach. Extended Cam Jurgens, extended Saquon Barkley way earlier than they needed to. Brought back Zach Bond on a 3-year, $51 million deal with $34 million guaranteed. Traded for John Mechie recently, acquired Jacorian Bennett from the Raiders to be in their corner mix. Small deals in free agency for Azeez Ojulari, Josh Uche, Adoree Jackson, and then they traded Kenyon Green for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round, Andrew Makuba, the safety, in the second round, Ty Robinson, a defensive tackle, in the fourth round. Losses in free agency. There are a lot of them. Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Darius Slay, Mekhi Becton, Isaiah Rodgers, and the aforementioned C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I'm going to try to keep all of those under a minute. I think I can do it this year.
That was
We're going to
impressive.
start our previews for every one of these teams with what we are excited about in 2025. Just a heads up, not all three of us are going to answer every single one of these questions. These shows would be 7 hours long if we did that. So just because one of us doesn't have an answer to this doesn't mean we're not excited about a particular team. I just want to get ahead of that as quickly as we can. Dave, why don't you kick it off here? What are you most excited about watching with the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles?
I think I'm just excited to see if the Eagles can keep being right and if they can keep staying ahead of schedule. And in particular, general manager Howie Roseman. I just feel like my favorite thing about the Philadelphia Eagles over the last 4 or 5 years, other than just that they're good at football, is this more than most others feels like a team that has prepared for the future excellently. Like they are making decisions 1 and 2, and in some cases even 3 years down the line that are bearing fruit. That can be as obvious as drafting Jalen Hurts when Carson Wentz is still on your team. That could be drafting Cam Jurgens while Jason Kelce is still playing at an all-pro level and saying, hey, it might not be for a while, but at some point this guy's going to step in and be our center of the future, and being right about it, by the way. That's drafting Nakobe Dean while TJ Edwards is doing a good job in the middle of your defense. That's drafting Nolan Smith while Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat are still doing their thing. That is setting aside a draft pick for a future year when you don't need to, and then using it to help you acquire Jalen Carter, which is the type of thing that Super Bowl contenders are not supposed to be capable of. But this team has had a blueprint and a roadmap that has been 1 or 2 years ahead of time, I would say since probably 2020. And nobody's going to be right 100% of the time, but Howie Roseman has been so right so often. And what's his reward for that? Having to do it again, basically. Like that's the challenge. Like now it's okay. Nolan Smith is fun when he's in a complimentary role. Can he step up and be part of your, like a core part of your pass rush? Can you deal with the loss of Milton Williams in free agency? Is Tyler Steen going to step up and be a great guard the way that Cam Jurgens was a great center? And on and on and on. So it's been incredibly impressive. I'm excited to see if they can keep doing it, because being right about so many of these personnel moves, I think, is why they've played in 2 Super Bowls in the last few years. But you got to keep being right about that stuff to stay ahead of the curve and remain one of the best teams in the league.
We'll touch on this in a few different areas, but there are so many young guys stepping into those roles this year that have been kind of waiting in the wings, the Jalen's Hunts of the world. And I think there are already some of those spots, Dave, where they're not happy with how this is going. That's why the Jacorian Bennett trade happens, because they're a little bit worried about Keely Ringo taking that job. So I think the hit rate this year is probably going to be a little bit mixed, but even if they get 2 or 3 of those, they put themselves in position, considering the state of their offense and the amount of continuity there, to again, Derrik, maybe be the most talented team in the league, even with all those young guys stepping in.
Well, and I think for me, part of like the planning for the future is I think what we see with most other contenders is you have your 1 year of greatness, and then it's probably not as easy the next year unless you have Patrick Mahomes and you're at that point you're cheating. But again, we've mentioned this with the Niners like a million times. They'll have a year where they win 12, 13 games. And the next year they win like 8 and they miss the playoffs. But if your down year for Philly because of how well you've like built ahead of time is a 10-win team that can still win the division, 11-win team that can still win the division, that's a pretty good dang good down year if you can, again, some of these rookies show promise, and then again for 2026 you can kind of reload and try to get back to the Super Bowl like you do every couple of years, it seems.
They do have the benefit of being able to throw the money around that they're able to throw around, and being able to retain most of their really, really good players helps here. You know, there are some teams where Zach Bond has the season out of nowhere that he had. You don't budget for that, and you just lose Zach Bond in free agency.
Zach Bond, the Bengal, does not stay in Cincinnati. Like, if
correct.
that
Zach
does
Bond,
not
the
happen.
Bengal, is not in the cards. The Eagles are able to do that, and I will say the hit rate has been excellent, and they do a very good job of having a lot of draft picks. They're always finding those thirds or fourths in the couch cushions, mostly thanks to Mickey Loomis, and that's how they volume shoot, right? I mean, that's what this team does. They're so proactive. The hit rate, if you actually look at it, like, we remember all the trades that work. We remember the Ronald Darby trade, and we remember the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade. There are plenty of like Ugo Amadi trades waiting back there that didn't actually work, but because they do so many of them, it doesn't really matter. And that's kind of how the Bryce Huff thing was last year. Because the Zach Bond thing works, we don't talk about Bryce Huff doing absolutely nothing for the Eagles on a massive deal and then getting traded. So I do think that the batting average is probably lower than we give Howie Roseman credit for, but he's taken so many at bats that this team is consistently in a very good spot.
And I don't think you can have this conversation without mentioning, like, they whiffed on Justin Jefferson. I'm well aware that the Eagles are fallible when it.
That was like 2 Super Bowls ago.
Exactly. But and when you do it with this regularity and this, like, I think the volume point is a great one, because if you just put up enough, you're going to get where you want to go with even an above average hit rate. And for the record, yeah, the Bryce Huff thing is bad, but to even bail on that early enough that you get a draft pick back for it by trading him to San Francisco, it's stuff like that I like to see, where even your failures, you can like mitigate them enough to help you out in the long run. And it's definitely not perfect, but it's been a heater in my opinion for about 4 or 5 years at this point. And Howie Roseman's been doing this long enough to know, he would probably admit, off the record at least, that he knows he can't do this forever. Like, there's going to be some bad whiffs, and maybe it'll be this draft class where it's like, if we had just done this differently, maybe the defense would have been another level better, you know?
Don't tell Derrik that.
Whoa, hold on. Yeah, whoa. What are you saying about Jahad Campbell?
Example.
Hold on.
It's just an example. I love that idea, and we talk about it with other contenders all the time, where it's like, see, this is why you've got to nail your draft picks. You've got to do this. You got to do that. And the Eagles are not perfect, but I think they're doing it better than pretty much everybody else over the last 4 or 5 years.
There's plenty to be excited about in a bunch of different areas, and we could easily throw out like watching Saquon Barkley again, the amount of pure talent that they have on offense. We'll get to a lot of that stuff over the course of this show, but the thing that comes to mind first for me is I'm very excited to see what the young core of this defense does and whether they can take another step together. When we were going into last season, we had no idea who Cooper DeJean was going to be, who Quinyon Mitchell was going to be. Jalen Carter had a promising year 1 and then takes a huge step in year 2. Nolan Smith goes from being truly just a rotational piece to somebody that I feel like is an attitude channeler for that entire defense. Like, what he does and the play style he comes with, it just seeps into everything about that front and how they feel. And I just didn't necessarily expect that from year 2 Nolan Smith, but that's exactly what we got.
He's
Zach
their
Bond,
DNA guy. Like, Nolan Smith has become their DNA guy.
He was the DNA changer that we did not anticipate last year. And then Zach Bond, it was funny. I was talking to a defensive coach when I was there early in training camp, and I was like, "All right, when did you guys know that Zach Bond would be Zach Bond?" And he goes, I think it was July 30th, so pretty early in camp. And he goes, "Anybody that tells you we knew at this time last year is lying to you." Like, we knew that he would be a good player. We knew that we had a good off-ball linebacker, starting caliber off-ball linebacker in our hands. And then the game started, and it was like, holy. And I think there were a lot of those moments with these Eagles defenders that we had never really seen in those roles before. And so the steps they can take individually and then collectively, I'm looking forward to that. Quinyon Mitchell, especially, and talking to people there, I think that he has come in with just a real amount of confidence and what he's seeing, and just the year one to year two transition can be big for a lot of guys, but I think it could be especially big for him. And there was one other element of this that I thought was particularly compelling when I was talking to people around the league just about that Eagles defense last year. And I was actually talking to another defensive coach about this. And he was mentioning how the Eagles like blended a couple different worlds and how they play up front. Because Vic doesn't come from like a penetrating one gap world necessarily with the way his fronts typically play. But there are guys on those Eagles defenses that their outside linebackers coach is Jeremiah Washburn, who is Jim Washburn's son. And Jim Washburn is like the godfather of those wide nine penetrating defensive fronts. And so there's still a little bit of that DNA with how their position coaches are. And they kind of blended those two things together, where somebody told me there, it's like, you don't want Jalen Carter eating blocks. We have to make sure that we're putting those guys in positions to really get after it. And so when you play that way and when you allocate that level of freedom to your front players, the guys behind them have to play off of them. There has to be a reaction and a certain fluidity the way that they're seeing things. Well, that sort of like subtle mind meld only gets accentuated as you play together longer. So I just feel like there's so many cool little pockets of this defense, Derrik, that even if they were the best defense in the league last year, and that may not happen again because of some of the weaknesses, there are pockets to this thing that I'm really excited to see how it grows moving forward.
I'm incredibly excited for it because I think the defense that comes to mind is how many times last year with the Bengals did we talk about, like, okay, Lou Anarumo's defense is doing so much and putting so much on these guys, but they're just not quite like mentally there to handle it. It was a lot of young guys that they were trying to bring in and bring along. All of the Eagles defenders, on top of being very good athletes, like DeJean's a great athlete, Quinyon Mitchell's a great athlete, obviously guys like Carter are really good athletes. They're just really smart players. Like Zach Bond is incredibly smart. Nakobe Dean can be like the general of a defense. And I think you saw some of that last year. Like Cooper DeJean, you saw that in the first game that he played against the Bengals, how smart he was. Quinyon Mitchell, same thing. He has some of the best click and close already for like a young corner, just trusting what he sees and going, which I think in the Vic Fangio defense as a corner is like kind of priority number one in terms of the way that you need to play. So I'm just incredibly excited about all of the guys that they have, but even the guys that they brought in this year. Everyone knows I'm like number one in the fan club for Jahad Campbell. And I think he's looked pretty solid in this preseason. Like I was actually just texting someone earlier, like if he was like 10% more violent, he would be a kaiju. Like he would be a complete monster of a player. And so hopefully we get there. And then even I think Andrew Makuba at safety, he's a little bit smaller, but I think he's a pretty well put together player already. So they've got a lot of stuff going on. I do think you need a really, really big year out of Carter to fill in for some of the guys they lost, but I'm still pretty confident this is going to be a good unit.
With all these teams, we're going to talk about the swing points that potentially exist. Where does this season hinge maybe for each of these individual teams? Derrik, you're going to kick us off here. What is the swing point in mind that you have for the Philadelphia Eagles?
It feels crazy to say the offensive line for the Eagles because they've been like the best in the league for 5 years now, but there's just a little bit more uncertainty, I think, along the interior than we are used to with them. Like Landon Dickerson is a great player, but he had a little bit of a meniscus issue, and they're saying that he should be ready-ish by like week 1, but that's just, you don't know how much of that stuff is going to linger. And when he is clearly your best interior player, I think if he's, 20% worse than he normally would be, I think that can hurt you a little bit. Juergens, he's fine. He's solid. And then on the right side, it's probably going to be Tyler Steen, who has been this slow burn development player for them. And I think he's been solid when he's been asked to play. But I think Mekhi Becton, even if there were some ups and downs in pass pro last year, was a mover in the run game. And I think that was part of why Saquon Barkley was able to run for 2,000 yards. I think it's a little bit to be determined if Tyler Steen is going to be that. So I think there's a chance when you have Jeff Stoutland that all this stuff could work out and there's nothing to worry about. But I do think that there's a chance that it's a little bit more rocky than we are used to.
Yeah,
If you
and
hadn't
Landon,
said it, I was gonna say Jeff Stoutland. I mean, not to say those concerns aren't valid, but I think I've reached the point where Jeff Stoutland, where I'm like, I trust that this will be okay. Even if it's not like rock solid from the word go, I trust that this will be okay.
it's funny that they did the Kenyon Green thing as like a heat check after the Mekhi Becton thing.
And I
where it's
bought
like,
it completely, Robert. Like the minute they did it, I was like, "Oh, cool, they're gonna fix this guy now." Like that was my gut reaction when that news came down. It doesn't sound like he's gonna start, but if he needs to play, I bet it'll be serviceable. That's just how I feel.
if Landon Dickerson can come back at close to 100% early in the season and they're really just working through Tyler Steen as the new piece along that offensive line, I have a decent amount of faith that this can get fixed. There aren't that many question marks with this Eagles team, especially on offense. I mean, the offensive line is really the only thing. Other than that, we're rolling back with the same group of superstars that we're used to on that offense. The big change is that they are, again, transitioning to a new offensive coordinator with Kevin Patullo coming in. He was their passing game coordinator over the last few years, and this is a team that it's been a mixed bag. They went to Brian Johnson after the 2022 Super Bowl appearance. That offense was disjointed. It was dysfunctional, never really found itself. They struggled in pass protection. They struggled against the blitz. That lasted 1 year. They go out and get Kellen Moore. They are so good again. They go to and win the Super Bowl and then lose another offensive coordinator. So there's a chance that Kevin Patullo is not long for this role with the Philadelphia Eagles if we have a similar set of results. But because it's been a little bit mixed with the guys who've come in, I think that we have to pay attention and talk about this. Patullo has an interesting background. He's like a Chan Gailey guy. So, I mean, I don't think there's going to be a lot of Chan Gailey DNA being inserted into the Philadelphia Eagles offense. I don't think we're going to see a lot of like four wide spread offense from this team. But I think the one thing that is worth remembering there and thinking about is that Chan Gailey is willing to try some weird. Right. Just there is some interesting ideas that Chan Gailey is willing to throw around. And so I think that as just a general guiding principle is something to keep in mind. But the other interesting element of this is that Patullo, even though he was the passing game coordinator, he's also been the associate head coach over the last couple years. And he's kind of been Sirianni's like right-hand guy, Dave, where he's in a lot of meetings that assistants aren't normally in. He's part of conversations that a lot of assistants aren't normally a part of. And so he's more of a piece of the fabric of the organization than a passing game coordinator typically would be. So this isn't somebody that you're really kicking upstairs that's not used to being a big part of how big decisions get made. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind as we think about what type of coach and the standing he has within the building that they're elevating to this sort of position.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but he came over with Sirianni from the
One of
Colts as
Sirianni's
well.
guys. Yes.
Yeah, like this is his dude going way back. So it is funny, and I don't have a take on this. I think it's a hard thing to know, but I do think it's interesting that they tried the continuity thing. Like they elevated Brian Johnson from their staff in 2023. It did not work. They go outside the organization on both sides of the ball to like just get proven guys with track records that have done this a lot at a high level, and it worked. And now they're going back to, the continuity and the guy that's been here and the guy that knows Sirianni really, really well. That's not to say that it will or won't work, but I think it's funny how they've kind of flip-flopped the philosophy on these two hires.
I think my take on that is I had the initial inclination to be a little bit worried about for the same reason, like remembering the Brian Johnson experience. But that was also like Sirianni's first rodeo with something like that. And I think that this time, it being, again, a guy that he's a little bit more comfortable with, has worked with for a very long time, it just feels like there's going to be a little bit more of the right give and take with that role that I have a little bit more. I also just trust Sirianni as a coach more than I did like 2-3 years ago in general.
It's 100% worth mentioning. And a couple different things just based on conversations I had with people when I was there. I think when Brian Johnson took over as a first-time play caller, I think Sirianni was inclined to hover a little bit, to be a little bit more involved with the offense than he might have been with Shane Steichen. I don't think that's happening with Kevin Patullo now there as the offensive coordinator. I think that Sirianni is going to be able to take the same sort of step back he took with Kellen Moore. When it comes to the offense, I think the biggest difference between moving to Brian Johnson and moving to Kevin Patullo after Kellen Moore is that when they moved to Kellen last year, they did a lot of cleaning out of the offense. Like they did a lot of, okay, let's throw everything out onto the table here, figure out what works and start pruning stuff. They didn't really do that after they moved on from Shane Steichen. And so I think that this last year was the hard look in the mirror offseason. And now I think that they're going to be able to just roll with the type of offense that they had last year because they've accounted for a lot of those weaknesses. So I think we're going to see the same sort of offensive identity and approach this year that we saw last year, maybe just dressed up with a few more things, maybe a little bit more motion, maybe a little bit more formation diversity. But I don't think they're going to be trying to reinvent the wheel here. I think they learned last year we can do kind of whatever we want to do, right? Like this doesn't have to be oh, well, if they're in light boxes, we have to run the ball. If they're reloading the box, we have to throw the ball. Our players are better than yours, and we're going to be able to dictate the terms of how this game is going to go. And I think that was an important lesson for them last year. I feel like some of the specifics, like cleaning up some progression stuff with Jalen Hurts, making things a little bit quicker and simpler. But I don't think you're going to see anything from this offense that shocks you when it comes to structure. I think there's going to be a lot of the greatest hits that we've seen over the last couple of years, Derrik.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
What's keeping us up at night about the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles? We did this last year. Just the point of anxiety you have about this team heading into the season. Dave, why don't you kick us off here?
Last year was arguably the healthiest year of Saquon Barkley's career, at least one of them. And by the end of it, if you include the playoffs, he touched the football 482 times. And I know, like, for the purposes of stat keeping and record books, we only use regular season. So if you look it up, you'll see, it was like 378. But my guy touched the ball more than 100 times in the playoff run. Like, that stuff matters just from a physical toll standpoint. He's missed multiple games due to injury in 4 of his 7 NFL seasons. So we know that the durability was an issue when he was with the New York Giants. Obviously, he's got a better supporting cast in Philadelphia. That plays a role in it. But it still feels worth mentioning that he nearly had 500 touches last season. And just out of curiosity, I went back and I looked up running backs who have had that kind of workload in the recent past. Ironically, back in the day, this stuff used to happen all the time.
Oh, yeah, the Larry Johnsons and
it's disgusting when you go look like LaDainian Tomlinson, Edgerrin James, Curtis Martin. Yeah, the Kansas City running backs back in the day. But really, since like the 2011 CBA, it's not very many dudes, and only the super mutants really fare well when this happens. Like, Derrick Henry does it all the time without it even mattering. So that's awesome for him.
He's never going to die. He doesn't count.
Yeah, if you're an X-Man, you can handle 500 touches in a season.
Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson used to do this type all the time. Good for them. But other backs, okay, just for instance, Josh Jacobs, 2022, 393 touches. The next year, saw his yards per carry dip by 1.5 yards and missed a month of the season with a quad injury. Jonathan Taylor, 372 touches in 2021, dealt with an ankle for the next 1.5 years that sent him to IR during the 2022 season, lingered. You got Arian Foster, who dealt with a back injury after 460 touches in 2012. He only played half of that year. The list goes on and on. Not everybody fell off a cliff the year after. There were plenty of successful guys. Like I mentioned, Derrick Henry. Ezekiel Elliott was just fine after having a similar workload in 2016. But by and large, it can be problematic when you're taking on this type of workload. We already know that Saquon Barkley has had a history with injuries. I'm not wishing this on him. I really hope it doesn't happen, but you'd be crazy not to be worrying about that a little bit after the amount of work that he did for the Eagles last year.
This is one of the oldest football analytics conversations of my lifetime. I mean, the curse of 370 is something that Aaron Schatz wrote about for Football Outsiders 21 years ago. This is a conversation we've been having for a very long time. And for the most part, guys are not as effective and often get hurt after getting this sort of workload. It's just what the history will tell you. The question is whether Saquon Barkley is one of those alien type guys where it just doesn't matter. And after last season, Derrik, I am tempted to think that he might just be one of those guys where it might not matter.
I want to believe he is because physically he is insane. But the reason actually why I'm willing to buy it a little bit is, one, he obviously just ridiculous athlete. But also, even though you are still getting touched and hit that often, It's not like he's running into a brick wall every play. Like, he is playing in a pretty favorable situation where he's able to get out into space and maybe take some lighter tackles than if he was just running into straight into the face of a linebacker at 2 yards. So that probably helps a little bit, but I will say I'd be shocked if he's 95% as good as he was last year. It's probably going to be more like 85%, which, to be fair, I mean, that's still what, like the fourth best running back in the league. So it's probably fine.
And also, just think about the amount of huge, long touchdown runs this team scored
Yeah.
last year. I mean, you look at it compared to other teams, they had 25 carries of 20 plus yards last year. But I mean, when you look at plays of 50 plus yards, he had 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, he had 4 plus yard touchdown runs last year 68, 70, 72, 65, and then 155-yard run. So if they don't get those sorts of huge explosive runs, what does that do to the complexion of the offense? They're still good down to down, but this is a team that really did rely on those very rare, like outlier explosive plays on the ground that most teams just do not get, period.
Especially in the second half. Like, how at some point last year, like maybe by like week 12, I was like, you just know that in the end of the third quarter, Saquon Barkley is going to put the dagger in a team. And it might be hard to continue to do that when you touch the ball 500 times the year before.
Yeah. So, and it's again, we're talking about if he's 90%, what does that do for the offense? And if he misses time, I don't think Will Shipley is Saquon Barkley.
No,
The offensive line can be great, but I think Saquon was doing so much more for that offense, obviously. But the offensive line has been very good for a long time. And I think Saquon was a perfect example last year of what an elite running back behind an elite offensive line can actually do. What's keeping me up at night, and this is really the weak point of the roster as we head into the season here, it's just the young pieces in the secondary. I mean, that second outside corner spot, I don't know how you can feel good about that right now. I was there on July 30th, and I was asking about that position. It was unsettled then, and I asked someone, I was like, would you be open to looking outside of the building to solve that if you don't feel like Adoree Jackson or Keely Ringo can get you there? And the answer was essentially like, well, always. Like, what do you,
It's the
going back to
Eagles.
the conversation
Yeah.
we just had, it's like always, like we will take shots at this to fix it. And so they trade for Ja'Cory and Bennett, and we'll see how that shakes out. But based on what Brooks Cabina, our Eagles writer, wrote this weekend, there's still no defined starter at that spot. Like, he's obviously been behind Bennett has because he came really late, and they made that trade because they weren't happy with the other guys. And so that's going to be a question until it's not. And then that second safety spot. Sidney Brown is going to be there right now. That's what currently he is penciled in to play there. We'll see what happens with Andrew Makuba. But when they're in nickel, which this team wants to be in nickel essentially all the time because Cooper DeJean gives them flexibility there, you're going to have a question mark at that other safety spot until it's not. This is shocking, but true. Reed Blankenship is the oldest player in the secondary for the Eagles. He is 26 years old.
I was going to
That
say,
makes sense
I think
when
he's
you
still on
say
this
it.
rookie contract.
He is
It makes sense when you
26
say
years
it, but
old. So there's just a lot of youth and a lot of questions with that position group specifically, even when you consider how good the good players are.
And I'm glad you went to Reed Blankenship because this was also what is keeping me up at night with the Eagles. And the way I want to frame it is very simple. Reed Blankenship is cool when he's your worst DB on the field in nickel. When he is your third best DB on the field in nickel, I think the secondary is not quite as full as it needs to be. And obviously that could change. Maybe Makuba is great. Maybe Ja'Cory and Bennett really sips up, whatever it is. But like, if I had to pick today who is the third best defensive back in that room right now, it's Reed Blankenship. That makes me feel a lot worse than when he was the worst guy in that unit.
Couple more categories here. For each of these teams, we're going to talk about what we're watching in the first month of the season. When these teams actually take the field, what is the number one thing we have in mind that we want to find out? Derrik, what is that for you in the Philadelphia Eagles?
This is kind of like a little bit granular, but like, so I like their edge room, right? Like, Nolan Smith is awesome. I was pining all offseason for somebody to sign Azeez Ojulari, and the Eagles have obviously went out and did that. Josh Uche is a solid pass rusher. Jalix Hunt, I think, showed some stuff last year. The problem is all of these guys are like 250 pounds or lighter. And they are coming off of a season where their best defensive end last year was Josh Sweat, who was like 265, closer to 270 pounds, a guy who could really sit there, set the edge, and like hold his spot. And I think Nolan Smith, for his size, does a very good job of that. But the rest of the guys, I think it can be a little bit more to be determined. Like, I would like to see more from Jalix Hunt there. I know for a fact Joshua Uche doesn't really do that. That's not what you brought him in for. And then I think Azeez Ojulari is like a decent, can like bend under guys and kind of make some interesting plays against the run, but he's not like Josh Sweat where he can just throw the kickstand and be a problem. And so I just wonder a little bit what this edge room looks like if they just really don't have that much size to them.
What they're betting on at that spot is just length, just pure length, even if those guys are a little bit lighter. Every single one of those dudes, Jalix Hunt, Azeez Ojulari, they're just long, long players at that spot. Whether that's enough or they need a little bit more beef as part of that rotation, we will find out. But based on how they've built that room, it seems like that's the bet that they're making. What I'm watching over the first month of the season, do we see any new wrinkles with this defense, with some of the position changes and some of the new guys that are coming in? What does Jahad Campbell do, right? Are we going to see Jahad Campbell as a pass rusher? Do we see them blitz a little bit more because they have Jahad Campbell and Milton Williams and Josh Sweat are no longer here? In base, sounds like Cooper DeJean is going to be playing a little bit of safety. How does that go? Are we excited about that? Does he transition there well? I think he might, but again, that's a new wrinkle for this team. And then the other part of this is not really specific, but more just big picture. When I was there, I was asking somebody on the defensive staff just about Vic Fangio and on a very simple level, like what makes Vic Fangio Vic Fangio? And he was saying that in his experience, Fangio studies and understands himself better than any coordinator that he's ever been around. Like when he's transitioning from season to season, he understands and can kind of see around the curve for how offenses are going to respond to him in ways that other defensive coaches just can't. Where when they went from like San Francisco to Chicago and there were tiny situational things where, okay, in the red zone, we know these are the beaters that they're going to be bringing because of what we did last year. How do we make sure that we're actually on the front foot in the adjustments we're making against all of that? And so them trying to figure out, all right, this is who we were a year ago. How do we make sure that we're ready for whatever next step in evolution offenses are going to take to attack us there? I'm just curious what that looks like for the Eagles. If I could say what the offensive evolutions were and what the defensive responses were, I would be Vic Fangio. I can't do that, but I am curious to see what that cat and mouse game looks like as this defense transitions into year two.
One thing I want to bring up with that too, and I was thinking about it just when I was looking at the Eagles defense, because obviously you got a healthy amount of turnover from a Super Bowl team. And we know he's a good player, right? But I wonder how much the Eagles are willing to put on Jalen Carter in year three. And I feel like it's not the type of thing that they would say on the record because you don't want to put that type of expectation on a guy who's still a young player. But if they feel like he is that Chris Jones type of defensive tackle that can just change the feel of your defense almost on his own, I wonder how that affects the rest of things. And, as big of a jump as he took in year two, if you can expect even more of that in year three, it obviously can just make so many things so much easier.
I think the expectation for him is defensive player of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the type of ceiling we're talking about with Jalen Carter in year three and what they need him to be as they transition to a bunch of new guys in that front. Speaking of new guys in that front, for each of these teams, we're going to try to find like an important supporting character that we think is going to be huge for this team's chances this year, but is a little bit further off the radar. Derrik, mine for the Eagles is Moro Ojomo. Your guy, Moro Ojomo.
Speaking my language. I love this.
True to the
He
brand.
was a rotational defensive tackle last year, played about 270 snaps. It's actually almost as many as Milton Williams played last year, which is actually kind of funny against the pass. So Milton Williams played 303 passing snaps last year. Moro Ojomo played 268. Moro Ojomo, better pass rush win rate according to PFF than Milton Williams had last year. So if he can come in and, I'm not saying replicate, but get close to the production that Milton Williams had over the course of the regular season, that goes a long way in this defense being able to stave off the regression that is probably coming for it, at least in some way after the season that they had last year.
Yeah, like I we'll see what he is as a run defender because I do think Milton Williams gave them a little bit more there. But if he could, be relatively what Milton Williams was as a pass rusher, which, I really think he can. Like, Ojomo is incredibly quick. He's explosive. You see some of the moves. Like, he's a guy I'm incredibly excited about. So if that, what did you say, like 270 snaps, if that kicks up by 100 or so and he gets a few more chances to get after it, like, I'm pretty excited for what that's going to look like.
For all these teams, we're rounding this out with what counts as a successful season for each one. Derrik, what is a successful season for the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think it's, we want to say, oh, go back and repeat because this team is great. I think realistically, when you are a Super Bowl team, you're probably going to have some degree of a hangover. So to me, it's just win the division again, which I think even with some degree of step back is like extremely on the table for them. And then just some of the new guys on defense that we've talked about, like really showing some signs for like, okay, we can keep this going for a handful more years. Like that to me is a pretty successful year.
That's pretty modest ambitions. Dave, what did you have?
I don't think repeating is realistic. Like it's just
I don't think repeating is realistic. I don't think they have to repeat, but I think winning the division and having the young guys look good when you just won the Super Bowl with the most talented roster in the league, I want more from yourself.
I can feel already, and we'll get into this as we do predictions and during the season, like I think a lot more of the Eagles than at least Derrik does, and maybe Robert too. Like I think a lot of this team. I said it's hard to put Super Bowl on anybody, right? So I can't go all the way to Super Bowl, but they clearly have a 3 or 4 year window to win another Super Bowl, and like this counts. Like this would count as a missed opportunity, I think, if they don't at least push for it. And so winning the Super Bowl is a hard expectation to put on anybody. I'll say bare minimum, I think this team should be in the Final Four. Like, get back to conference championship game weekend. I think they are that talented that anything less than that I would call a wasted season.
I want to be clear. I would pick them to make the Final Four, and I will be doing that when we get there. But it's just like...
Say it with your chest, Derrik. Come on, man.
If they win like 11 games and just win or lose like a weird wild card game, I'm like, whatever. It's fine.
I also said
I'm sure the city of Philadelphia will say,
well, they're fine. Never fine unless they get
the team that they booed the Eagles in the 2018 after the first half of the season on the season opener on Thursday night after they won the Super Bowl. They booed them off the field in the first half. So I think 11 games and a first round playoff loss would not be good enough for the city of Philadelphia. I also said Championship Sunday. I think repeating is hard, but we know that typically Championship Sunday is a marker of who the best teams in the league are. And then after that, it requires a lot of luck. It requires a lot of chance. If they can get back to the Final Four, I think that is success for this version of the Eagles. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.